Chapter 1. A Half-Expected Party. Zira Darkmeyer's modest attic room flickered in the glow of a single candle, its sputtering flame casting long shadows across weathered floorboards. The scent of cheap perfume wafted up from the establishment below, mingling with the aroma of her wine, a reminder that this room belonged to the local brothel's mistress. Zira sat with perfect posture at a worn table, her crimson-painted nails drumming against a wine bottle. Despite her immaculate appearance and carefully arranged silk dress, exhaustion lurked in the depths of her dark eyes.
"What do you think, dear Doreen?"
Zira asked, her voice carrying its usual practiced charm.
"This opportunity with Gundren Rockseeker could prove quite profitable, though I must admit caravan guarding wasn't exactly what I had in mind for my next venture. Still,"
she trailed off, her gaze distant.
"Perhaps it's time for a change of scenery."
Across the table, Doreen lounged in her chair with casual grace, her dazzling blue eyes twinkling with mischief. The mummified goblin hand around her neck swayed slightly as she shrugged.
"Count me in, love. Word on the street is that Dwarf's got something valuable planned. Besides, I've been getting that old familiar tingle lately. You know, the kind that says Maldrath's reaching out again. Funny thing is, I haven't had his trinket for years now."
Zira swirled the wine in her glass, an amused glint in her eyes.
"My dear, you've woven such an intricate tapestry of lies around you, I doubt any real sorcerer could find you. It has worked like an invisibility cloak for you."
She raised her glass.
"To new ventures."
"And to leaving certain troubles behind."
Doreen agreed, clinking her glass against Zira's. Her free hand unconsciously touched the strange charm around her neck.
"Though between you and me, trouble tends to follow wherever we go."
"That it does,"
Zira replied with a soft laugh, though something darker flickered behind her eyes.
"but at least it's never boring."
The candle guttered in a draft from the window, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Below, the sounds of the brothel were quieting as night settled deeper over Neverwinter. Tomorrow would bring preparation for their journey, but for now they sat in comfortable silence, two friends sharing wine and unspoken worries in the flickering darkness. Outside, a cat yowled in the alley, and Mr. Mouse stirred in Doreen's pocket. Soon they would leave this city behind, for better or worse. But tonight, in this quiet attic room, they could pretend their troubles were as distant as the stars appearing, one by one, in the night sky above. Neverwinter's marketplace bustled with life. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the briny scent of fish and the sweet tang of ripened fruit. Merchants bellowed their prices to passers-by, and children wove through the throng, chasing each other in gleeful abandon. Morthal Pashtor, a devoted cleric of Helm, surveyed the crowds with a practiced eye. He had stood watch over many such bustling scenes, and experience had taught him to remain ever vigilant. Gundren Rockseeker's wagons, laden with trade goods bound for Phandalin, waited a short distance away. Morthal had signed up for escort duty, seeing it as another chance to protect those who needed his shield and to spread Helm's guiding light. He slipped through the press of bodies, determined to buy last-minute provisions for the journey. Suddenly, panicked screams rang out. Morthal's head snapped around to see a slender elf stumbling into a fruit seller's stall. In a heartbeat, wooden slats cracked beneath him, and bright red apples tumbled across the cobblestones. Gasps and curses erupted, and the elf, dressed in muddied leather, hair loose and eyes clouded with pain, murmured incoherently about shadows, guilt, and a name that Morthal did not recognize. Sensing the elf's distress, Morthal rushed forward, his heartbeat quickening. He reached out a steady arm and guided the stranger upright. The elf's gaze flickered between lucidity and confusion, as though haunted by 1,000 ghosts.
"Careful,"
Morthal said softly, concern evident in the set of his jaw. The elf blinked, seemingly unsure of where he was.
Shadows. I never meant to.
The elf whispered. His voice trembled, weighed down by secrets he could scarcely articulate.
Peace, friend.
Morthal murmured, turning briefly to the fruit seller. He pressed a pouch of coin into the merchant's hands.
This should cover the damage.
The merchant's anger melted into grudging gratitude as he knelt to salvage what was left of his stall.
Where?
The elf stammered. His voice trembled as though weighed down by the echoes of 1,000 nightmares. Morthal's trained eye assessed the situation. Years of military experience had taught him to read people, and this stranger radiated a profound anguish that went beyond physical pain.
Be at peace,
Morthal said, his voice carrying the steady authority of a veteran commander, yet gentled by compassion.
I am Morthal Pashtor, a servant of Helm.
The elf's eyes, haunted and wild, darted around like a trapped animal's.
The shadows. They follow. I never meant to open.
His words dissolved into incoherent whispers. Morthal maintained his calm demeanor, extending not just physical but spiritual support, a technique he'd learned through years of helping troubled soldiers.
Helm's shield protects all who seek guidance,
He said, carefully helping the elf to his feet.
Let me help you find your way back to the light.
Something in Morthal's words seemed to pierce through the elf's confusion. The stranger's breathing steadied slightly, though his hands still trembled. At the wagon camp, the elf finally introduced himself as Ilara, his voice carrying the weight of untold sorrows.
I walk the dark path,
He said, fingers unconsciously tracing the hilts of his twin swords.
do things that can't be undone.
Morthal studied him thoughtfully. His years of service had taught him to recognize the difference between common criminals and those truly seeking redemption. In Ilara's tortured gaze, he saw something familiar, the look of a warrior who had faced darkness and survived, though not unscathed.
The road to Phandalin is long,
Morthal said, choosing his words carefully.
and sometimes the path to redemption requires company. I've been assigned escort duty to Phandalin.
He gestured toward the wagons.
We set out soon. Why not come with me? It'd be safer to travel with us than wandering alone, especially if,
He trailed off, letting Ilara fill in the silence as he chose. A long pause followed, broken only by the creaking of wagon wheels and the chatter of nearby mercenaries. Ilara's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the offer.
You would trust me? After seeing...
He gestured vaguely at the market scene.
Helm teaches us that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising each time we fall.
Morthal replied, his voice firm but kind.
I've done things.
Ilara finally admitted, his voice tight.
Terrible things.
Morthal regarded him silently for a moment. Though they had only just met, the cleric could sense the weight of regret behind Ilara's words. Whatever secrets this elf carried, they had carved deep wounds.
I'm no stranger to helping those who carry burdens,
Morthal said gently. Ilara hesitated, his expression torn.
I don't want to bring any trouble.
You just bring yourself.
Morthal replied, extending a hand.
Helm's protection extends to anyone truly seeking a path forward.
Ilara swallowed hard, then slowly reached out. His fingers brushed Morthal's, and in that moment a faint glimmer of hope seemed to spark behind his eyes.
All right,
he said, voice trembling with both uncertainty and gratitude. And so, amid the bustling streets of Neverwinter, their bond was forged. Neither could yet know the trials awaiting them on the journey ahead, nor the redemption each silently sought. But for one brief moment in the sunlit market, two souls burdened by pasts of blood and duty found hope in each other's company, taking the first steps of a shared quest. A small campfire flickered in the midst of a quiet clearing, its warm glow dancing across the faces of the unlikely band of travelers. Wagon wheels creaked in the background, still heavy with the goods meant for Phandalin. The scent of pine resin and damp earth mingled with the faint aroma of smoke. On a sturdy log, Balin nursed a flagon of ale, letting out a contented grunt as he swallowed. He kept his massive sword, seemingly shaped from solid iron, propped against the log, easily within reach should any threat present itself.
I can't tell which is better.
Doreen mused aloud, a grin tugging at her lips as she sat cross-legged nearby.
The sound of crackling fire or Balin slurping.
Her eyes darted to a nearby pouch that looked promising for pickpocketing, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. The dwarf lowered his flagon, a corner of his mouth quirking.
Ale is worth slurping, and I'm worth enough gold to buy my own lass,
he said pointedly, having caught her wandering eye. Zira adjusted her cloak with practiced grace, ensuring it caught the firelight just so.
Really, Doreen, must you always prod at our companions?
She chided, though her tone carried a hint of amusement.
Though I must say, Master Stonehammer, that ale does smell rather exceptional.
Save your flattery for the merchants in Phandalin,
Balin grunted, but there was no malice in his voice. Morthal cleared his throat.
The coastal road has been safe enough, but we should discuss what to expect once we turn inland toward the Sword Mountains. The territory gets rougher there.
At the mention of the Sword Mountains, Zira's fingers tightened imperceptibly on her cloak. Her carefully maintained poise wavered for just a moment as memories of narrow village streets and children's cruel laughter threatened to surface. She turned her face toward the fire, using the motion to hide the brief flicker of emotion in her eyes.
Rougher how?
Doreen asked, poking at the fire with a stick. She cast a quick, concerned glance at her friend, noting the subtle tension in Zira's shoulders.
Bandits, mostly,
Morthal replied.
We'll need to stay alert once we leave the main road.
There are worse things in those mountains than bandits,
Zira said softly, her usual affected tone absent for just a moment. Then, as if catching herself, she straightened her posture and added with practiced nonchalance,
or so I've heard.
You sound like you know the area,
Morthal said carefully, watching her face in the firelight. Zira's response was a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes.
I just prefer to leave such rustic locations in the past where they belong.
She covered her confusion by adjusting her already perfect hair. As the night wore on, the flames shrank into glowing embers, casting long shadows. One by one, they drifted to their bedrolls or posted themselves for watch. Tomorrow would be another step toward Phandalin, with all its unknown perils. But for tonight, they shared a campfire and a cautious camaraderie. Subtle as it was, the circle felt just a bit more bonded than when the sun had set. Near the end of his watch, Morthal noticed Elara still sitting rigid, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond their camp.
The past doesn't define us,
he said quietly, only for Elara's ears.
Helm teaches us that each dawn brings new choices.
Elara's shoulders relaxed slightly, though he didn't respond. But for the first time that evening, he turned his back to the darkness and faced the warmth of the fire. Morning sunlight trickled through the autumn canopy, illuminating the narrow forest road toward the Sword Mountains. The wagon creaked along, guided by Rolgar, their driver. Around the vehicle, the escort walked in loose formation, Elara scouting ahead while Zira and Doreen brought up the rear.
I still can't believe the Rockseekers left Neverwinter days ago without waiting for us.
Doreen muttered to Zira, adjusting her sword belt.
They're dwarves.
Zira replied with a slight eye roll.
Probably couldn't wait to get their hands on whatever's waiting in Phandalin.
Balin trudged alongside the wagon, occasionally glancing at the rocky ridges flanking the road.
They know what they're doing.
Ahead, Alara suddenly raised his hand.
Stop.
He said quietly, voice barely above a whisper.
Bodies.
The group tensed, moving forward cautiously. Up ahead lay 2 dead horses in a bloody heap.
Careful!
Morthal warned as Doreen started forward. His tone carried an edge that made her pause.
I just want a closer look.
She muttered defensively. Zira caught her friend's arm.
And risk walking into an ambush. Think, Doreen.
Since when are you so cautious?
Doreen snapped, shrugging off Zira's grip. The stress of the past few days had begun wearing on their usually easy friendship.
Rockseeker horses?
Ilara said simply, pointing to the distinctive saddlebags visible beyond the blood. Balin gripped his glaive tighter.
Then the dwarves could be in trouble.
Or dead.
Morthal said grimly, scanning the ridges. They scattered to nearby boulders and stunted shrubs, leaving Rolgar to back the wagon slowly away from the scene. Despite lingering tension, they waited for Morthal's counsel. The cleric drew a slow breath, calculating their options. Doreen shifted restlessly behind her boulder.
Let me check the North Ridge. I'm quick.
Alone? That's foolish.
Zira hissed.
We should stick together.
Because your magic is so great?
Doreen shot back.
Enough.
Morthal cut in.
Doreen and I will take the North Ridge. The rest approach along the road. Wagon stays back.
Without waiting for discussion, Morthal set off with Doreen following. They scrambled silently up the craggy slope while Ilara led Zira and Balin toward the horses. Suddenly, a volley of arrows came from the south ridge, finding their mark in Ilara's chest. He dropped with a choked gasp as Balin shouted in alarm. The north ridge erupted next. An arrow struck Doreen's shoulder, spinning her against the rocks.
Above!
She snarled through clenched teeth.
Ilara's down!
Balin knelt beside the fallen elf, trying to stem the bleeding. Zira planted her feet, face tight with concentration, summoning crackling energy. 3 magic missiles streaked forth. One struck a goblin on the north ridge, sending it tumbling down. The other 2 blasted a south ridge archer off its perch. Through sheer willpower, Ilara forced his eyes open and staggered to his feet, leaving a trail of blood droplets.
Still here.
He gasped. On the north ridge, Morthal and Doreen cornered the remaining goblin. Doreen lunged, but her wounded shoulder betrayed her. Her blade scraped uselessly against rock.
Hold still!
Zira shouted, launching a firebolt. The goblin ducked and flames exploded harmlessly against the ridge.
Watch it!
Doreen stumbled back from the heat.
You almost hit me!
Maybe if you weren't in the way.
Zira snapped, cheeks flushing. The goblin tried to escape, but his run was cut short by Morthal's hammer, crushing its skull with terrible efficiency. Meanwhile, on the south ridge, the final goblin drew its bow at the wounded Ilara. But before it could loose the arrow, Zira's second firebolt found its mark. The creature disappeared in a shriek of flames. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and Ilara's pained gasps as he sank to his knees. Morthal hurried down to assist, channeling Helm's healing light into the elf's wounds.
Should have seen them coming.
Ilara muttered, color slowly returning to his face. Balin squeezed his shoulder.
You're alive. That's what matters.
Thanks to my spells.
Zira said, brushing soot from her robes.
Though some people might disagree.
Doreen yanked the arrow from her shoulder with a grunt.
Some people might prefer not being nearly roasted by their friends.
Morthal stood, expression grim.
These aren't random bandits. Goblins this organized usually have a camp nearby.
The rock seekers could still be alive,
Balin said. They concealed the wagon in dense undergrowth, with Rolgar looking visibly relieved to stay behind as guard. The party moved deeper into the forest, following tracks only Ilara seemed able to read. He led silently, stopping occasionally to study broken twigs or disturbed leaves. The others followed, tension thick in the air. A sudden snap made them freeze. Balin had nearly triggered a crude snare, saved only by Ilara's quick hand yanking him back.
Lighter steps,
Ilara whispered, frowning at the dwarf's heavy boots.
Some of us aren't built for sneaking,
Balin grumbled. Minutes later, Doreen's impatience nearly sent her tumbling into a shallow pit.
I saw it.
She insisted as Zyra gave her a pointed look.
Did you? Like you saw that arrow coming earlier?
Zyra's concern came out as sarcasm.
I don't need your...
quiet.
Ilara cut in, his rare command silencing them both. The sun dipped lower as they pressed on. Finally, the forest thinned, revealing a clearing with a cave mouth where smoke wisped from the entrance. Balin's grip tightened on his axe.
Last chance to turn back,
He whispered, though they all knew no one would. They had come too far to turn back now.
The dwarves had a plan, a journey to make. Through mountains and forests, a risk they would take. They set out ahead, but trouble would come. Two horses lay lifeless, their journey undone. Ilara stood strong, though arrows did pierce, defying his fate, his spirit fierce. Morthal led on, with courage and might. Through shadows and danger they stepped into the fight. Morthal had wisdom, tactics to share. When goblins attacked, the group held their stare. Ilara rose up, wounded but bold, charging the goblins, his story retold. Ilara stood strong, though arrows did pierce, defying his fate, his spirit fierce. Morthal led on, with courage and might. Through shadows and danger they stepped into the fight. Doreen searched bodies, anger in her chest. Nothing of value, no treasure, no chest. Morthal took charge to follow the track, hoping they'd find what the goblins had snatched. Ilara led on, with eyes sharp and keen, avoiding the traps that lay in between. Through shadows and woods they came to a cave, goblins awaiting their goblins had snatched. Together they stand, their hearts filled with fire. The journey continues through danger and mire, each wound a reminder of battles they face. Bound by their courage, no challenge erased.